Okay, can you hear me now? Is this better? Yeah, I think
Yes,
you hear me
yes,
now.
thank you.
Yes, thank you. Again, the four parts are will be. Today we talk about the history of the Hasidic movement. Why? What were the reasons that brought the movement? What was it trying to do as a movement? Tomorrow we'll talk about some of the opposition to the Hasidic movement, why there was opposition. On the third meeting will be more or less about the thinking, the philosophy of the Hasidic movement, which means what was the philosophy of Hasidic thought? Because there's a difference between the movement and the thought. And then the fourth meeting will be the stories, Hasidic stories, and how they represent Hasidic thinking and why the stories became so popular in the Hasidic movement. Okay? So I want to first of all explain the word Hasid. What is Hasid? So let's see if you can see that. The word Hasid. Hasid, in Hebrew, Hasid. Hasid means somebody, the word comes from chesed. Chesed means kindness. Kindness. Gentil. Hasid. And it usually means somebody who does something out of love and not out of obligation. Out of love and not because of obligatia. Right? So, for instance, it says in the Tehillim, in the Psalms of David, it says, Sadiq Adonai b'chol derachav v'chasid b'chol ma'asav, which means Sadiq is usually somebody who does the right thing. Chasid is somebody who does more than the right thing. So Tzaddik Hashem b'chol ma'asav, b'chol derachav, God does always the right thing in all his ways, but he does more than the right thing when it comes to action. It's an interesting thing to say, because most people, it's the opposite. In their ways, they promise, but in their actions, they just do what they have to. So God does the right thing in his ways, but he does even more than the right thing when it comes to actions because people need more help. So tzaddik is somebody who does the requirement. Chassid is somebody who does more than the requirement. From the word chesed, kindness, to do more than you have to do. Not more than the obligation. Now, this is a little puzzling because the movement is called Hasidim, which means they want to do out of love. Okay, so the word Hasid is out of kindness, to worship God out of love. Hasid, I think we would call that today a little bit like charismatic Christianity, possibly, but I'm not sure because I'm not an expert in Christianity, but that's what I do. So, but the word Sadiq, now in the Pentateuch, Sadiq is usually somebody who does according to the law. Whatever the law says, they do. That's called Sadiq. I'll give you an example. In the book of Genesis, there is a story that Abraham comes with his wife Sarah, and they come to the city of Gerar, which today is on the way to Beersheba. And there's a king whose name is Avimelech. And Avimelech says to Abraham, "Who is that lady?" He says, "That's my sister."
Yes.
You remember that story?
Yes.
And so Avimelech takes Sarah to his palace, and God appears to Avimelech in a dream, and says to him, "You have to give that woman back. Her husband is a prophet, so give her back." And then Avimelech in the dream says to God, "Hagoy gam Sadiq tarog. I am a nation, but I'm also at Sadiq. I didn't do anything wrong. So how can you kill me for not doing anything wrong?" He said it's his sister. So you see that the word Sadiq is somebody who did not do anything wrong. They are not guilty. That's the Sadiq. but they don't do out of love. They don't do more. I give you an example. Yes, I give you an example. The mother sends the son and so says, you go to the epicerie, to the supermarket, and I need you to buy 3% latte. Okay, so he goes, no 3%? He goes home. Sorry, no 3%. That's called tzaddik. He's right. But if you do out of love, he goes, and he goes the first one, 3% we don't have. He goes the second, 3% we don't have. He goes to 5, they don't have. Finally, he buys 1%, 2%, 4%, whatever they had, and he brings it home. Says, I couldn't find 3%, but here are all the other options. That's called out of love. Because you want to do the right thing. So, and you know you can't get exactly that, so you try something else. So that's the difference. Is there anybody else coming in? Okay. Okay. Wait, we have more people here. We have also who just came in. Luxa Serban. Okay, so that's Hasid and Tzaddik. Now, the interesting thing is, in the Torah, which means the Pentateuch, the word Hasid is somebody who does out of love. The word of Tzaddik means just somebody not guilty. I'll give you another example. In the book of Deuteronomy, it says that when people have a fight, argument, yes, no, they go to the tribunal, and they go to the judge, and it says, and v'hitzdiku et tzaddik v'yurshiu et rasha, which means the judge will call the tzaddik not guilty, and the evil one guilty. Because in the Bible, the word evil means somebody who is guilty, and the tzaddik is somebody who is not guilty. It's also a term for somebody who is just not guilty. Tzaddik. Than evil. Wait, I don't want to philosophize. Yes, I'm trying to explain the meaning of the word and how the word changes historically also. So in the Pentateuch, tzaddik is somebody who does the right thing. Rasha does not do the right thing. That's it. Simple. And Hasid, in the Tehillim, in the Psalms, is somebody who does more. However, when you look in the book of Proverbs, Mishle of Solomon, in the book of Proverbs, the tzaddik all of a sudden becomes somebody who God watches over, who God saves. In other words, the tzaddik all of a sudden becomes somebody who has a special relationship to God. So there's a difference between the tzaddik in the 5 books of Moses and the tzaddik in the book of Proverbs. This will explain what seems to be a paradox. Because the Hasidic movement, the rabbi is called the tzaddik, and the simpler people are called Hasid. I would think it should be the opposite, because Hasid is somebody who does out of love, and the tzaddik is somebody theoretically who just does obligation. But to understand this paradox, you have to understand that the word tzaddik went through transformation. In the book of Proverbs, the tzaddik became tzaddik yesod olam, which means the righteous one is the foundation of the universe. So it means more in the book of Proverbs than it does in the Pentateuch. And so when the Hasidic movement calls the rabbi the tzaddik, they mean this verse in Mishle, tzaddik yesod olam, that the righteous person is the foundation of society. And the Talmud says in every generation, there are at least 36 righteous people. Tzaddikim, 36, right? Meaning special righteous people. Right. So, and the whole Hasidic movement is based on this idea you have to find a teacher, a spiritual guide who will be your tzaddik. This becomes this concept. By the way, this concept is also interesting because in Orthodox Christianity, I know there are different types of priests. You have a priest, which is more of a spiritual guide. But what is the name? What is it? Is that duchovnik? Now, it's interesting because the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, he lived in Podolia, in Medjugorje. Today, that is in the Ukraine. So in the Ukraine, you had lots of duchovniks because you had Orthodox Christianity. It is very possible that one of the reasons why the Hasidic movement caught on so quickly, one of the reasons, is because people wanted a rabbi who was not just to talk about the Torah and Halacha, but to guide you in life. Just like the Christians wanted to have the duchovnik, there were Jews who wanted to have a rabbi who would be the tzaddik, who would be somebody to teach you about life.
To look forward, to help them, to guide them.
Something like that. Let me just read. Okay, recording is done. Okay, so now I want to go back in time and talk about why all of a sudden there was a Hasidic movement. I have not described yet the Hasidic movement. I'm going to assume we don't know what it is, even if you do. So, but I want to talk about historical occurrences which happened before Israel Baal Shem Tov. So you have now in your computer, I will show you. I have the one only in English here. The Romanian way, I can't have it on the same screen. That's my problem. But if you want, what I can do is, would you like to read it in Romanian? What I sent out?
In the first paragraphs?
Yes, maybe just sit here so they can hear you also in the Zoom when you read. She's now reading what I sent out to everybody. Hasidism. This is from an article by Rachel Elior. She is professor emeritus from. No, you can stand. Kabbalah at Hebrew University, and there's an article she wrote about the origins of Hasidism.
Și spune așa, Hasidismul a apărut ca o nouă doctrină spirituală și un fenomen social în cel de-al doilea trimestru al secolului al XVIII-lea în Podolia, regiunea Volhynia și Galicia estică, regiunea sud-estică istorică a comunității poloneze lituaniene, care este partea central-vestică și nord-estică din Ucraina de astăzi. Israel Baal Shem Tov, care a trăit între 1698 și 1760, fondatorul mișcării, cunoscut și sub acronimul PEST, și-a conceput viziunea lui mistică despre lume pe baza scrierilor și cărților cabalistice pe care le-a studiat la mijlocul anilor 30. Această viziune despre lume, care se baza pe ideea că înalta entitate divină ascunsă și lumea revelată de jos sunt interconectate și se reflectă una în cealaltă prin intermediul gândului și al limbajului, a provocat consecințe sociale semnificative de-a lungul tuturor comunităților evreiești din Europa de Est.
The best is Baal Shem Tov. Best.
Exact. Prescurtarea. Ești a început să predea noile lui idei în Medziboz, în Podolia, unde, în anii 40 și 50 ai secolului al XVIII-lea, a fost invitat să rămână în mijlocul comunității evreiești ca doctor cabalist, cum se spunea atunci, ca un vindecător pe bază de plante al trupului și un vindecător al sufletelor, precum și ca un profesor al învățăturilor cabalistice, care erau asociate cu tradiția mistică din secolul al XVI-lea, care stipula: oricine dorește să studieze adevărata înțelepciune, Chochmat Haemet, Kabbalah, trebuie să meargă pe drumul celor pioși, Derech Hasidut.
Here I have to add what she said here, that we know that he was referred to as doctor and Kabbalista. This was discovered by Professor Moshe Rosman of Bar-Ilan University, where I teach. He went to Krakow, and in Krakow there is an archive of the Baron who was in charge of the area of Podolia. The family was something like Charteristish or something like that. And they found the city tax pages from the city of Medjugorje during the time that the Baal Shem Tov, Israel ben Eliezer, lived in the city. Now, it's interesting. The Baal Shem Tov, his name was Israel, the son of Eliezer. Israel Baal Shem Tov. He was not the rabbi of Medjugorje. There already was a rabbi in Medjugorje. He was a spiritual guide. People came to him to ask questions, sometimes also to ask him questions in natural medicine, plants, and things like that. He was seen as a sort of spiritual healer.
Please, would you allow me to translate for a few people who don't
Yes, of course, of course.
Ok, deci ideea este că Israel Baal Shem Tov, fiul lui Eliezer, nu era neapărat rabin în Medjugorje, era un ghid spiritual. Asta este ideea de bază. Și oamenii mergeau la el să-i ceară sfaturi fie despre tratamente din plante sau tratamente spirituale sau vindecare spirituală.
Adică nu doar până și tratamente. Da, așa am spus.
Ok, dacă vrei să traduci.
Nu putem, da, traduc tu.
Continue. He's doing a good job. Continue.
No,
Okay, so what happened was they discovered these transcripts or these the books that had to do 2 years of the city tax. And in 1 year, it said Israel Baal Shem doctor, and it said no city tax, meaning he was exempt because he was doctor. In the second year, it said Israel Baal Shem Kabbalist, no city tax. So obviously, in the minds of the people, it was the same thing. It was Kabbalist, spiritual guide, and also spiritual healer, doctor, healer. So, yeah, you want to.
Nu au apărut în înregistrările fiscale din 2 ani la rând, apărea odată ca doctor scutit de taxe și odată ca și cabalist scutit de taxe.
Right. Okay, now he's going to talk about the political events that happened in Podolia and in the Ukraine and in Poland before Baal Shem Tov was born, and how that affected the environment, social environment. Yes, please. Okay. Everything is fine. Everything. Continue.
Au existat 3 factori covârșitori care au caracterizat și au influențat această perioadă din istoria evreiască în care s-a răspândit studiul adevărat de înțelepciuni, însoțit de un mod de viață pe calea celor pioși. Instabilitatea crescândă, experimentată în acei ani de comunitățile evreiești din Polonia și sud-estul Poloniei, care comemorau încă evenimentele înfricoșătoare din cea de-a doua jumătate a secolului al XVII-lea. Aceste evenimente includeau masacrul tuturor comunităților evreiești de către țăranii ucrainieni robiți care se răsculaseră împotriva stăpânilor lor polonezi în timpul unei răscoale între anii 1648-1668, conduse de Bogdan Khmelnytsky.
Yes, this is a very important event. Bogdan Khmelnytsky was in charge of the Polish-Lithuanian Guards. It was like a mercenary army. And they were fighting against the Turks.
Yes.
Yes. And what happened was the Polish-Lithuanian government was not paying them a good salary. So Bogdan said, if you're not paying us, we're going to fight you. And so then they started to fight the aristocrats. And because the Jews were protected by the government, by the kings and so the Jews were associated with the upper class, even the Jews were not upper class. So there was, not only did they fight against the aristocracy, but they also massacred Jews. And in that period, 1648 to 1668, 20 years, we don't know exactly how many, but the assumption is anywhere between 50 to 80,000 Jews were killed in massacres by Bogdan Khmelnytsky and his military troops, Cossacks, if you want to call it. And so you have to understand, there were not a lot of Jews in the world at that time. So saying 60 to 80,000 is like talking about the Shoah. So this was a major, major trauma, and it's only one of a list of traumas that will happen in Poland during the 17th century. Okay, yeah, please, continue. Illiterate.
Iovagii ucrainieni greco-ortodoxi, neștiutori de carte, au perceput această răscoală ca fiind o parte din revolta lor națională împotriva opresiunii exercitate de nobilimea poloneză catolică, iar pe evrei îi considerau agenții învățați ai acestora.
That's two. Yes.
Al doilea, B. Războiul ruso-suedez, în care părțile beligerante luptau pentru controlul asupra regatului polonezo-lituanian. Acest conflict a avut loc între anii 1654-1656 în Polonia și Lituania și a rezultat în uciderea în masă a mii de evrei care au fost acuzați de către polonezi că ar fi fost trădători. Și ce? Campaniile repetate ale tătarilor musulmani în Ucraina pentru a răpi sclave albe pentru piețele de sclavi din lumea musulmană între 1660 și 1699. 4. Invazia Turciei în Podolia, 1672-1699. 5. Marele război de la Nord, 1700-1721. Confruntarea dintre Rusia și Suedia, care s-a purtat pe pământ polonez în legătură cu coronarea lui August al II-lea de Saxonia ca rege al Poloniei, care era sprijinit de țarul Rusiei și respins de regele Suediei. Acest război a fost urmat de un război civil polonez, războiul succesiunii poloneze, între 1733 și 1738, între August al III-lea, susținut de ruși, și Stanislav
Leszczyńsk, yes.
susținut de suedezi. Războiul civil din interiorul Poloniei avea ca scop împărțirea puterii asupra regatului între doi rivali care erau sprijiniți astfel, unul de regele protestant al Suediei și de regele catolic al Franței, a cărei soră se căsătorise cu Leszczyńsk, susținătorii uneia dintre părți, în timp ce cealaltă parte era susținută de țarul Rusiei, Austro-Habsburgi și conducătorii Prusiei. Această situație instabilă, amplificată de războaiele și invaziile necontenite, a dus la colapsul economic și la revolte sociale, alimentând episoade foarte răspândite de vandalism și furturi, organizate de grupuri de țărani ucrainieni numiți Hidamakin sau Gaidamax, care atacau localitățile și cartierele evreiești între 1734-1744 sau 1750-1768 și ucideau mii de locuitori ai acestora. Pierderea vieților omenești a fost copleșitoare în rândul comunităților evreiești din Ucraina și din teritoriile polonezo-lituaniene între anii 1648-1768, așa cum arată numărul victimelor din timpul revoltei ucrainiene. Peste 100.000 de evrei și-au pierdut viața în mâinile cazacilor, conform istoricilor polonezi. Pogromuri ample împotriva evreilor au izbucnit și în acele regiuni din care trupele poloneze s-au retras și unde au urmat diverse războaie și invazii. Țăranii ucrainieni, greco-ortodoxi, neștiutori de carte și menținuți în sclavie, s-au revoltat și i-au ucis nu numai pe nobilii polonezi catolici care i-au menținut în starea de iobăgie și dețineau pământul, conducând după reguli feudale, luând cea mai mare parte a produselor, dar și pe administratorii și funcționarii evrei, considerați agenții acestei nobilimi. Țăranii revoltați au atacat de asemenea și au distrus complet sinagogi, școli și case de studii evreiești, sporind și mai mult dezastrul economic care fusese o consecință a acestor evenimente îngrozitoare. Supraviețuitorii evrei comemorau aceste evenimente tragice prin rugăciuni și ritualuri, prin cronici istorice, scrieri omiletice și literatură mistică. Tendința literară, care datează din 1650 mai departe până la sfârșitul secolului al XVIII-lea, arată că scriitorii evrei erau preocupați de a documenta aceste evenimente tragice și inimaginabile și în același timp doreau să exprime speranța profundă în răzbunarea divină, profețind o speranță puternică în răscumpărarea mesianică. You're welcome.
That was pretty good. Okay, so as you can see, even though we think we're in difficult times, things can always get worse. I always say that. You know, in politics, politicians always like saying change is always like the word which is the magic change. But people forget that change can also be worse.
Yes.
They forget that. So change. Okay, so as you see, there are major events that take place in the history of Polonia, Lithuania, Polonia, which had a very large Jewish community in the 17th century. And because of this, there was the feeling that life was difficult. There was a lot of loss of life, a lot of murders that took place. And the Jewish community needed a feeling of hope, esper, hope. Esperanza, oh, like in Spanish, right? So yes, there was a need for hope. By the way, I'm not going to talk about this, I'll just mention it. It's understandable exactly at this period, right after the Khmelnytsky massacres, you have the false prophet called Shabtai Tzvi, Sabbateism. There is a movement which starts in Izmir, in Turkey. In Izmir, and today it's called? In the Levant, yeah. Well, you have the whole Ottoman Empire, which goes all the way to Transylvania, I think. Or at least Bulgaria, and yeah. Yes. And also into Lithuania. So Shabtai Tzvi was a false messianic movement. And because people were looking for something, they were looking for hope. And in our tradition, when things are really bad, we always say, wait for the Messiah. It means that if things got really bad, that means it can only get better. When the Jews were expelled from España in 1492, they all thought this was so terrible, tomorrow will be the Messianic age. And the Jews who went to Tzafat in Israel in the 16th century, who had run away from Spain, they were sure that this was going to be a special time, because if we went all the way to the bottom, you can only go up. And the Jews in Poland felt the same way. Things are so terrible, it can only go upwards from this point.
So when started this movement, at the end of the 17th?
Shabtai Tzvi, 1626 to 1676. Yes. So, and if you remember, the massacres are 1648, 1668. It's not 17. It's a mistake.
16.
Yes, it wasn't that many years. It was here. Let me give you the exact years. Had it at the beginning here. The 1648 to 1668. It was actually a little bit less than that. During that 20-year period. Right after that starts Shabtai Tzvi in Izmir. Now, the Hasidic movement starts later, because as I said, the Baal Shem Tov, the best, as you know, best, Baal Shem Tov. What is Baal Shem Tov? The master of the good name. Shem in Hebrew, name. Tov, good.
Yes.
Shem Tov, good name. Good name. Baal, to own the good name, to be the master of the good name. What does that mean, by the way, to be the master of the good name? As far as we know, the Baal Shem Tov was a mystic. Somebody who was interested in, what is the definition of a mystic? You know, in Greek, mysticism, mystique, probably comes from the Greek word mistos, which means to close your eyes. Because when you close your eyes, you don't look at the natural mundo, you want to look beyond. Like when we say in our prayers, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one, we cover our eyes. Because if you want to witness God, you cannot look at the world. You have to witness in your heart. So we cover our eyes and we say Shema Yisrael. So a mystic is somebody who wants to understand what is beyond the physical universe, beyond the dimensia of the physical universe. And in Christian mysticism is usually the attempt to use technique in order to somehow reach some type of, we would call it today, how would I say, not a change of cognition, but a change of, I'm trying to think of the right word. In Hebrew, it would say shinui hatoda'ah, which means to change your perception of, to modify your your apprehension of life, but there's another word in English. I get mixed up between the Hebrew and the English sometimes because I teach in Hebrew. So yes, it'll come to me. Anyhow, but I'll give you an example. You have people who do transcendental meditation, like the yogis in India. And what happens when a person does transcendental meditation? What makes it transcendental? Why is it called transcendental? Because people who do transcendental meditation, they are using techniques in order not to feel their body, to put themselves into the mind, into a dream-like state, like a rev. Right. Oh, so it's altered consciousness. Altered consciousness. How would you say that? Yes. So altera conscienza. Now, this was actually checked scientifically. What they did was they put electrodes on people's brains who did transcendental meditation to test the brain waves, because brain waves, of course, are also electrical. And when you are awake and you are thinking, your brain gives off beta waves. Beta waves are quick waves because your mind is working very quickly. When you are asleep, your brain waves are going slower, and we call that alpha waves. How do you say alpha waves? Yeah. So they found out that people who are doing transcendental meditation, their brain is in alpha waves, even though they are not asleep. If you call out their name, they will say yes. They can hear what you're saying, but they're able to put themselves into a sleep-like altered consciousness. Yes. It's like self-hypnosis. It's almost like self-hypnosis. Yes. So these are different techniques. If you go back to the Bible, what were the techniques of the prophets of the Baal? Remember, there was an idol worship in Canaan called the Baal. In the techniques of the prophets of the Baal, we find in a story of the book of Kings, when Elijah the prophet tells the 400 prophets of the Baal, let's have a contest. You call out to the Baal, and I will call out to God. So they accept the contest, and Achav, the king, thinks it's a wonderful idea, and the people they go up to the mountain in Haifa of Carmel, and the 400 prophets of Baal, it says, start cutting themselves. They'd go to do. They take like knives to cut themselves. This is a well-known technique that, by the way, is even used sometimes still today. If you feel, when the body feels a lot of pain, it shuts off. When the body feels a lot of pain, it will shut off. And when the body shuts off, you don't feel the body. So there were some mystics, in order to get to an above body consciousness, would purposely cut themselves to have so much pain that they would be able to. That's what it looks like. That's what the prophets of the Baal were doing in the book of Kings when it says "Vayigodedu kemishpatam," which literally means they were cutting themselves according to the way they normally do, comme d'habitude. And then, of course, they're not successful. The Baal does not answer them, and then Elijah, builds the altar that was destroyed, and he calls out to God, and a fire comes out from the heaven and eats his offering, and then the people bow down and says, God is the only God. So there are techniques that were used, even a few in the Bible. Another technique which is known for mystical experience is music. Music was used in all types of, for instance, you have among the Sufis.
Yeah.
So when they have what they call the zikr ceremony, so there's a certain dance that you have to do in the zikr ceremony. It's dancing, it's singing, and these can also put you into a mindset where you forget the natural world, right? So the idea of dance and music. Now, if you remember the story in the book of Samuel, where King Saul goes to meet the prophet Samuel, and he's looking for his father's donkeys. How do you say donkeys? Yeah. And so Samuel says to him, you will go, you will find them in a certain place. On the way, you will bump into a group of prophets. And then he tells him what will happen. Saul meets the group of prophets, and it says that they were dancing and they were using musical instruments.
From that time, we have Sufis.
Well, I don't know if you have Sufis, but you have mystics. Yes, yes. Well, all the prophets were mystics. So, and then it says that Saul started dancing with them, and then the spirit of prophecy came upon him. So you see that music, dancing, was also something that was used to induce a mystical experience.
Yeah.
Yes, there are other things. Another thing that we find, but we find this later, is the use of special names of God. Almost like magical incantations, names of God. Because, in the Hebrew language, there are many names of God, more than any other language. So in English, you have, for instance, God, the Lord, that's it. So, I don't know how many you have in Romanian.
In Turkish, I was going to say in Turkish, Tanrı, Allah, King.
In Turkish.
Yes.
And in Romanian? Yes. Yeah. Right. Right. And in French also you have connotations, but it's really Dieu. But you can say other things too, or Señor. You can say, but yes. So, but in Hebrew, there are many. We have Yud Kei Vav Kei, the special name, El, Elohim, Tsevaot, right? Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yod. Yes, you have many different names. And so the names of God also become, in Jewish tradition, a technique. I'll tell you an example. In the Talmud, there is a story of 4 rabbis. It says they entered the orchard, the Pardes, the orchard. It's a story, they entered the orchard, which is a metaphor. It means that they entered the upper world, which was called the orchard. Why is it called the orchard? Because in Farsi, the word for orchard is Pardes. And Pardes is paradise. Paradisimo. Yes. So this was the term which was also used, like in the Quran, for Gan Eden, for a place which is above world. And in the 12th century, there is a commentary called the Tosafot, which means the additional commentary. It was like the grandchild of Rashi was one of them, the famous rabbis in the 12th century in France. And they said, how did they enter the Pardes? They used a special name of God. So already in the 12th century, we have this idea, you use a special name of God to reach this mystical experience. So that explains why the Baal Shem is called Baal Shem, the master of the name. Which name? Not his name, the name of Duminizeo. Right? It becomes he knows the names. He knows how to use the names. He knows how to use the names for experience. He knows how to use the name for terapia. He knows that, in other words, he's the master of the names. So to be a mystic in the 18th century means to be a master of names. Every name is like a key. Okay.
To use the names to know the Hebrew letters.
Yes. In addition, yes. Definitely in the Jewish tradition.
Yes.
Jewish. Right. Yes. And of course, Christian Kabbalah is influenced from Jewish Kabbalah in the 13th and 14th century. Okay, so all this was to explain who is Baal Shem. Baal Shem is a mystic. He's a scholar, but he's very interested in techniques, in understanding how to have direct experience with the spiritual world. Now you can say, what is the connection between a person like this and a Hasidic movement, which is a popular movement? But first, I'm just trying to explain who the Baal Shem is. This is a person who was revered as a spiritual guide, not necessarily as a rabbi who talks about Jewish law. And this is something which is going to become very popular in Poland at the time. I want to read you something which I didn't post, but I will send you everything that I posted. It's called The Letter of the Baal Shem Tov, and if I can find it quickly, I will read it to you right now. One moment, I didn't think we would get here. Oh my word. Sorry. Oh my. Moment. Okay. It's in Hebrew, so I'll just do traductia as I talk. Here it is. For those on Zoom, they can see the Hebrew, but I don't think it'll help you. So, it'll inspire you, maybe. Let's see. It's in Hebrew. Anybody who happens to understand, that's okay. Yes. You know, that reminds me one time I took this trano from Prague. I told you the story. From Prague to, I told you the story. I'll say it again. Okay. So I took this trano from Prague to, where was it, to Katowice, and from Katowice to Krakow. And there's a fellow from Hong Kong who's sitting in the same cabina. So this is a 7-hour train ride. So I wear my kippah. So he looks at me and says, "Are you Muslim?" I said, "No, why?" He says, "You have something on your head." I said, "Jews also have something on their head." Oh, okay. So hour later, he says, "Do you speak different languages?" I said, "Yes, English, French, Hebrew." He says, "Hebrew? What's Hebrew?" I said, "Hebrew is the language of the Bible." He says, "Bible? What's the Bible?" He starts to think for a moment. He says, "Oh, yes, I was in England and I took courses there in the university one year and they mentioned the Bible." And, I said to myself, I am used to the experience that when I say I'm Jewish, either they like you or they hate you. But he never heard of us. It was very interesting. I had a relative who used to do business with women's wigs, especially among the ultra-Orthodox community in New York, women's wigs. And he would go to China because he would buy women's wigs and bring them back to New York. And he had 7 children. Now, for the Chinese, 7 children, that's like an army. I don't know why, because China has 1.5 billion people, but for some reason, yeah, but in one family, that's like an army. So he says to him, why do you have 7 children? So he says, well, do you remember what the Japanese did to you in the Second World War? Of course, we know what the Japanese did. Says, well, the Germans did that to us. And that's why we need 7 children. Yeah, so that's what he said. Yeah.
That's why we got endangered now.
Yeah.
And we didn't do that.
You know, my father was a rabbi in Montreal for 60 years. With 53 years, he was the rabbi of the congregation. Another 7 years after retirement, he was the unofficial rabbi of the congregation. And one time he told me the story about a couple who converted to Judaism in Montreal. They wanted to become Jewish, they converted. So then after they converted, my father said, okay, what is your plan now? What are you going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to have children. I said, okay, well, that's what everybody does. He says, no, because of the Shoah, we have to have more Jewish children. Very interesting. They converted and they said this. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. Yeah.
Ask the question. If you convert as a male Adam.
If you convert?
If you convert to Judaism as a male Adam.
Yes.
You do the circumcision. Yes.
It depends. In the countries where you had medical circumcision, so then you only have to do what's called ceremonial circumcision.
Okay.
Because you're already circumcised. You know, like in the United States, even to this day, about 60% of the population, they do medical circumcision because of infections, and it also helps stop cancer of the penis. Yes, yeah. I'm sorry?
That's how we started circumcision.
Yeah. Oh, and also AIDS. It also prevents the, yes. So it's interesting, you know, the World Health Organization, you know, in the United States, there are a lot of people against circumcision, as in Europe, but the World Health Organization in Africa has been pushing circumcision of the people. Okay, the Muslims do circumcision, I'm saying the Christians. They've been pushing circumcision because it helps stop the spreading of AIDS in Africa. So here in one place, the doctor is saying it's no good. In the other place, the doctor is saying it's good.
Always have something better than
Okay,
I don't
want to make a contest. I'm just saying that this is I just wanted to point. How do we get to this again? Oh, you're asking about a male. Yes, no. So if there's already a medical circumcision, then they bring an expert who does one tiny drop of blood with a pin, and then they make the blessing, and that's it, because there's nothing to do a second time. So it's just sort of like ceremonial, that what happened to me now I'm doing in the name of God, if you want to put it that way, right? We had, I deal with conversion in Israel. Most of the time, that's what happens. On the rare occasion you have an adult who still needs to do real circumcision, then it has to be done in the hospital with a doctor who is also somebody who knows the laws. Yes, at that age, at that age, it's better. For a child, it's not necessary, because a child who is 8 days old, they don't really feel pain. And you can see that when you come to a circumcision, when you have a very good, what we call in Hebrew, mohel circumciser, it goes very quickly. The child cries for maybe 30 seconds and then stops. It's very strange. It's like they just stop. Yeah, I have a friend in Israel who is a doctor who does circumcision, and he used to do many circumcisions for Muslims. And he used to talk to the families and say to them, please do it at a young age, because it's much better for them. If you wait like Ishmael, who was 13 years old, that's not a good idea. So it used to be they would wait because of Ishmael. But if you do it, even at 1 month, it's better than at 13. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, anyhow. Okay, I go back to this. I want to read you a letter that we have from the Baal Shem Tov. I mean, somebody has to finish that or else I'm stuck with it. It's really, okay. Okay, very good. So this is a letter that the Baal Shem Tov sends to his brother-in-law, whose name was Gershon of Kutov, meaning married to his sister. Brother-in-law married to his sister. Gershon of Kutov moved from Poland to Israel. And they were quite close, and the Baal Shem Tov used to send him letters and tell him about what was going on. This letter that we have, how do we have the letter? He gave it to his student, Yaakov of Polna, which means Yaakov of Poland, Yaakov Yosef of Polna, one of his close students, who was supposed to go to Israel, but never went. Because he never went, he had the letter. And he published it 20 years after the Baal Shem Tov died. The Baal Shem Tov dies in 1760, and is published in 1781, together with his book, Toldot Yaakov Yosef. And in the letter, I'll just read it in translation. On Rosh Hashanah, the first New Year's, Jewish New Year's, in the year 1847, in Hebrew, Tafkuf Zayin, 1847. That's when the Baal Shem Tov was either 47 or 48, depends how you count the years. I made a special Hashba'at Aliyad Neshama, which means, Hashba'a means to make angels take oath. It's like you're calling out the angels. And Aliyat Neshama is astral ascent, which means to feel your soul going up to the heavens. So he did a technique, which is called calling out to angels, hashba'ah, from the word taking an oath. And I felt my soul going up to the heavens. So this is a technique that he used to do. And he's writing in a letter to his brother. And I saw wonderful things in this vision, what I'd never seen in my whole life and never saw before. And I learned some things there that I'm not able even to tell. And I don't think I'll ever be able to tell them. But when I came to the level, which is called the lower Garden of Eden, and I saw souls of dead people and people who are alive. Some of them you know, but it was an endless amount of souls going up and down. And they were going from world to world through the column, which is known to the mystics. And they were all very happy. And I can't even explain how happy they were. And there were also many evil people who changed their ways and they were atoned. And it was a great time. And many people were accepted as in penitence. And I saw that they were also happy. And the souls asked me and said to me, "Honorable one, can you come with us? Because you can assist us going upwards." And when I saw this happiness, there's also here in brackets. I'm going to jump over the brackets. I went from place to place until I came to a level of the Messiah. And I saw him teaching Torah with all the righteous ones and with the 7 shepherds, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And again, I saw there was a great happiness. And I was wondering, why was everybody so happy? Does this mean that I am going to die and leave the world? And then they said to me, no, it is not your time to die. We're just very happy that you are doing these names down there and using these techniques. And then I said to the Messiah, when are you going to come? And he said to me, this is how you will know. When what you studied, when it will be revealed to the world, and your well springs, your funduna will be revealed to the world, and other people will be able to do these type of techniques, then all of evil will be destroyed, and it will be a time of salvation. I was very in pain about this because I said to myself, it's going to take a long time, etc. So you have a very unusual story here, where the Baal Shem Tov is describing to him an episode that he went through doing techniques, feeling his soul go up to the heavens, seeing all these different things, and learning things as if that's what everybody does. So this was the time, this is a mystic. This is somebody who's living in a different world. The people who come to be the students of the Baal Shem Tov were all scholars, but they were scholars who had never met somebody who used techniques for mystical experiences, because you don't study that when you study in yeshiva, in the academy. You study Torah, you study the Bible, you study the Talmud, you study the Midrash, maybe you study Kabbalah, but you never meet somebody who is actually doing techniques and trying to reach these levels. So for many of these people, this was something, an anomaly, something unique, that they can meet a person like this. We don't even know, we only know some of the things from the Baal Shem Tov because a lot of it was not written down. We know his ideas because his students wrote them down, but we know very little about his techniques. There's only one technique which is written down in a book called Keter Shem Tov, which is what names of God to think about when you are immersed in the mikveh, the ritual bath, in a natural body of water. What names of God you have to think about. That's the only one we have left. But the other things. So you have this person as a mystic, and somehow he becomes the founder of a movement which is going to change the Jewish. Now, how is this movement? What is the message of the movement? Wait, questions until now? Question? No? Okay, no question? Sometimes I say questions, and somebody says, yes, I have a question. What part did you not understand? I say, I didn't understand something. I'll say, what didn't you understand? I didn't understand from the beginning. Well, that's why there's a recording. They can go back to the beginning.
So how? So when people don't study, people don't know how about Shem Tov, the way of his mystical way. People do not study.
It depends. People in the Hasidic world who are scholars, they do know about it. They don't study the techniques, right? They talk about his philosophy. That I will talk about next week, not this week. But his philosophy, they do talk about. It's a sort of a spiritual psychology, his philosophy. But the techniques, you're right, they don't really discuss the techniques.
Probably they have techniques. So now we are going to discover anyway.
Okay, yeah. Now, at this point, I want to talk about what is the Hasidic movement? What is the Hasidic movement? So, as I said, let's get back to this. You have the best. He is the founder, but he's more the inspiration than the founder. Let me give you an analogy. Maybe it's not a fair analogy, but I'll give you an analogy. In Christianity, obviously, you have Jesus, you have the apostles. That's the beginning of Christianity. But Christianity as a religion separate from Judaism starts with Paul. So then you can ask the question historically, does Christianity start with Paul or does it start with Jesus and the apostles? The answer is it's both correct. Because obviously the inspiration is Jesus and the apostles, and Paul is the organizer, the one everybody needs an organizer. And he lives 80 years later, but he is bringing this message to the masses, to the Greeks, to the Romans, which were not part of it. Christianity was a Jewish sect until 80 years later. Now, I'm going to use this analogy for the Hasidic movement. The Hasidic movement, the inspiration is the Baal Shem Tov. all the Hasidim see themselves as disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. But the Baal Shem Tov is not the founder of Hasidism. He's the inspiration. People tell stories about him. People talk about what he taught. The actual founders of the Hasidic movement are the students. I will mention just two, but there are approximately 14. One of them is called, I mentioned Yaakov Yosef, Jacob Joseph. Yaakov Yosef of Polna is one of the students.
Try the green one, sir.
Okay.
We have another.
Yes, we're coming to the Brenton. Jacob Joseph of Poland. That's the way they call it. Poland is really important. He wrote the first book of Hasidism in 1781. And Yaakov Yosef is the one who describes a lot the concept of the centrality of the tzaddik, that you need the spiritual guide. He pushes this idea. Everybody needs a spiritual guide, the tzaddik. He was also sort of a tough person, less a people person. The next one is Dov Ber of Mezerich. Now, Mezerich is also a city in Poland, not far, also in the area of Podolia. And he becomes the main disciple, the main student of the Baal Shem Tov, Dov Ber of Mezerich. This Dov Ber of Mezerich is the actual founder of the Hasidic movement. He is the one who pushes groups to be formed. He has many students who start filling Poland with Hasidic synagogues, attracting young people to the movement. And now I want to explain exactly what the movement was. What was it trying to say? And as I said, as the organizer, as the CEO, if you want to call it that way, it's Dov Ber of Mezerich. The inspiration is the Baal Shem Tov. Yaakov Yosef Polnar, let's say, is the first literary scholar of Hasidism, but the one who really starts it as a mass movement is Dov Ber of Mezerich. And he is also a scholar, but he also has that unusual side to inspire people to continue. And that's what you need in a movement. Very often people are very spiritual, they cannot start a movement. They are too insular within themselves, like Isaac Luria in Sfat, like the Vilna Gaon. I mean, you have people like this, like the Baal Shem Tov. They're not the type to create a movement. They don't have that ability. It's a different capability. It's a different type of talent. And very often it's like that. Prophets, most of the time, who speak to God are not good at creating movements. Elijah was terrible as a people person, but he was a great prophet. so that one doesn't take away from the other. Even Moses needed Joshua. He couldn't talk to the simple people. His mind is always in the upper worlds. You need somebody in the middle. He needed Aaron. Aaron was the one who spoke on his behalf. You know, the Talmud says, the Midrash says, Moses says, I am kvad peh, I'm a stutterer, right? So the Midrash says, what does it mean that Moses was a stutterer? The whole book of Deuteronomy, he's talking. Where's the stutter? He does such a good job, right? He's talking for weeks and weeks with the people at the end of his life. At the end of his life, when he's 120, and what's the problem? So the Midrash says, well, the reason why he was a stutterer because he always talked to God. When you speak to God, you stutter. And so, but God says to Aaron, he's the one who will talk to the people. So what is the Hasidic movement? Let me explain. The Hasidic movement was a movement whose goal was to create new hope. Esperanza, new hope for the Jewish people after these terrible times. The Haidamaks and Melnitsky and all these terrible things that happened. How do you bring hope? You know, when we had the Shoah, the state of Israel brought hope to the Jewish people. But after the attacks in Poland, there was no state of Israel. There was no change in Jewish life to think that now things will be better. So you needed a message that people could relate to, that would instill hope to the people. What was the message? In Jewish life in Poland, during the time of the Baal Shem Tov, how did you become close to God? All Jews were religious. But how do you become close to God? Through the study of Torah and through keeping the commandments. But to study Torah, first of all, you have to know Ivrit, you have to know Hebrew. Secondly, you have to learn the Hebrew of the Bible. You have to read the commentaries. And then after that, you have to study the Talmud and the law and the commentaries, etc. Takes a long time. There was no free education. The government would not pay for free education, definitely not for Jews. So the women studied at home. The men would study till the age of Bar Mitzvah, 13, and then that was it. So how much could you learn till the age of 13? And then they went to work because there's also no ministry which is going to support you when you're not employed. Of course, I don't know if they have that in Romania either. So anyway, but I'm just saying, right? They have that in Germany. In Germany, you come to Germany, you say you're a refugee, you can live there for the rest of your life. But so if you didn't work, that was it. So you didn't have the luxury of studying Torah after that. So who would study Torah? You had two possibilities. Possibility number one, if you married into a rich family, and then your father-in-law said, I want you to study Torah. Okay. So you had people like that who were smart people, and then the father-in-law would pick the smart boy because he wanted his son-in-law to be a famous rabbi. You did have cases like that. But let's say you didn't have a wife from a rich family. The community itself would watch the boys and see who was very smart. If by the age of 11, 12, they saw that this boy is a child prodigy, how do you say that? A gifted child. Yeah. So then the community would single out this child and support them after the age of 13 to study to be a rabbi, to be a teacher, to be chazan, a cantor, or whatever the community needed. You know, when you read the books from the 18th century and the 19th century about rabbis when they were children, I'm talking about famous rabbis, all the books start the same way. When they were 5 years old, they knew the Pentateuch backwards and forwards. When they were 10 years old, they knew the Mishnah, which is the oral tradition, off by heart. By the time they were 13 years old, they could read the Talmud with Rashi and Tosfot. These are commentaries from the, etc. And whenever I read these stories, I say I believe every story. Because if these children were not gifted by the age of 13, the community would not spend money on them. So they had to be child prodigies. Okay, maybe the stories are dramatized, but the child, if it was not a gifted child, the community would not waste their money because they didn't have a lot of possibilities for a stipendium. Yeah. So this is usually the stories. Now, but what about the regular person who after the bar mitzvah, they go home and that's it, and they get a job? How do they become close to God? The message of the Hasidic movement was, especially Dov Ber of Mezrich and the stories associated with the Baal Shem Tov, that if you are happy when you do God's commandments, when you pray, and you sing in the synagogue, and you dance with joy, so God loves the heart. If you're real in your heart, you can be as close to God as the greatest scholars. So, in the Talmud says, Rahmana liba bai, which means God wants the heart, wants genuine heart. And now I'll tell you a Hasidic story which will characterize this idea. This is a story attributed to the Baal Shem Tov. So the story was the Baal Shem Tov is in his synagogue in Mijibish, that little town in Podolia. And it's Yom Kippurim, which is, of course, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And it's in the afternoon, and the Baal Shem Tov is sitting and he looks very disappointed with the prayers. And then all of a sudden, the door opens and a shepherd, how do you say shepherd? Pastor, like, yes. Like a shepherd boy walks in and he starts looking around and he picks up a prayer book, opens it up, closes it, puts it down again, and he starts listening. After 5 minutes, the boy opens his mouth, says, Aleph, Bet, the letters of the alphabet. Aleph in Hebrew, Aleph, Bet, Gimel. He's screaming, Hey, Vav, Zayin. And he's trying to dance around, saying all the letters, Chet, Tet, Yud. And this is starting to disturb, So some people walk over and says, excuse me, you're interfering. So they're about to push him out. Baal Shem Tov says, no, I need to speak to him. So they bring the boy to the Baal Shem Tov. He says, what are you doing? He says, well, it's Yom Kippur today, right? Says, of course. He says, this is the day we're supposed to pray, right? Of course. Well, I don't know how to pray in Hebrew because I never studied Hebrew. But when I was a young boy, I was taught all the letters of the Hebrew language. But I don't know the Siddur, I don't know the prayer book. So I said, God, here I am. I'm in the synagogue. You know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it in Hebrew. So take all the letters of Hebrew and you put it together because you know what I want to say. So Baal Shem Tov looks at the boy, he says, until you walked into the synagogue today, I was very depressed because I felt that our prayers were not going up to heaven. They were hitting the roof and coming back again because people were not real. But when you walked in, your prayer was the most real prayer. And it opened up all the gates. Yeah. Right? This is exactly the meaning or that the Hasidic movement was trying to preach. That the simple person can be close to God. Okay, they can't be a prophet, but they can be as close to God as the greatest scholar. Because in the end, there is a shortcut. And the shortcut is called sincerity and faith. Sincerity and faith. I'll tell you another story associated with the Baal Shem Tov. A lot of these stories are the same. The story goes like this. The Baal Shem Tov is going from town to town. A lot of the stories about the Baal Shem Tov, he's going to town disguised so that nobody knows who he is because he wants to seek out crypto Jews who were in the army or got distance from Judaism. So one time he's going back to Mijibish and it's getting late. And he goes to, he walks by and he sees a Jewish house because you see the mezuzah on the door, on the post. And he knocks on the door, it's 8 o'clock in the evening. He says, look, I know it's getting late, but I have no place to sleep. Do you have a place I can sleep? The man says, we have a very small house, but if you want, you can sleep in the barn. There's nothing in the barn. I'll give you some straw. You can sleep on the straw. Hashem just said, that's perfect. So he gets the straw and he puts it in the barn. And the Baal Shem Tov goes to sleep. Okay, the night continues. It's now 2 o'clock in the morning. And the Baal Shem Tov wakes up and he hears somebody singing from the forest. Somebody singing in the forest. And it sounds like the service of Rosh Hashanah. Now, this was before Rosh Hashanah, but it sounds like the synagogue Rukachuna of Rosh Hashanah, of the New Year's, Jewish New Year's. And he tries to figure out where it's coming from. And he starts walking out. He goes out of the barn, goes towards the trees, and he sees the man from the house standing there with a prayer book and swaying right and left with his eyes closed and singing the words from the prayer book of the Rukachuna of Jewish New Year's. So he stands there waiting, and the man does not see him. He's so involved in his prayer. And he waits for him to finish. When he finishes, he says to the man, he says, tell me the secret. Man says, what do you mean? What secret? Says, you just prayed the prayer of Jewish New Year's and it's not Jewish New Year's. That's in a month. What's the secret? Says, no secret. Says, come on, you can tell me. I'm familiar with these things. Just tell me the secret. I won't tell anybody else if you don't want me to. I says, what do you mean secret? Says, I told you, these are the prayers of the new Jewish New Year's. Says, oh, I didn't know that. What do you mean you didn't know that? Says, let me explain, he says, my father passed away 3 months ago. And I wanted to say prayers for my father. Now, I don't understand the prayer book, but I know how to read Hebrew. So what I did was I took his prayer book, and every day I read a different page. Today, this is the page I came to in the prayer book. And every night I spend time and I read it. I don't understand, but I read it. And this is what I do. And he looks about sometimes, he says, do you know the prayer book? So he said, I do. Can you help me out? Where is the morning prayer? Where is the afternoon prayer? Where is the evening prayer? So I've never done it right. He says, okay, I have an idea. 1 second. He runs back, he gets straw. He says, the long piece of straw, this is the morning prayer, shacharit. Put it into the book. Now, the shorter 3/4, that's the afternoon prayer. Put in the book. The little one, that's the evening prayer. Put in the book. And he does the whole book. This is for this holiday, that's a holiday. And the whole book is now full of the straw. And I says, thank you, this is wonderful. Baal Shem Tov goes back to the barn, goes back to sleep. So the man is thinking and he's meditating and he's thinking about it for a while and he's looking at the prayer book. Finally says, you know what? It's nighttime. Maybe I can say the evening prayer for the first time at the right time. He gets really excited. He looks for the little straw and opens it up. And it says, that's the way the evening prayer starts. And he gets so into it. And he gets into real fervor, finally doing the right prayer at the right time. And he gets so nervous, his hands start to shake and all the straw falls down from the prayer book onto the ground. Oh no! Says, I have to ask the rabbi what to do. So he puts the prayer book down and he starts running towards the barn. But at this point, it's 4 a.m. and the Baal Shem Tov left. The door is open, but he can see on the top of the hill, the Baal Shem Tov is walking in that direction. He starts running. He says, Rabbi, the prayer book, it fell. But there was wind and the Baal Shem Tov could not hear him. Baal Shem Tov goes to the other side and he's walking down the hill and the man is running behind him. Rabbi, the book. And he doesn't hear him and he keeps going. And this goes on for about half an hour. And then the Baal Shem Tov comes to a little river.
Yes.
And he comes to the river and he takes out his handkerchief. And he puts it on the water, walks on top of the handkerchief, and goes to the other side. So this man is walking and he runs up to the river, doesn't know what to do. He takes out his handkerchief, puts it on the water, and he also goes to the other side. And he's running after the Baal Shem Tov and finally catches up with him and he grabs him and he says, excuse me, Rabbi, I need to ask you something. What happened? He says, I need to ask you, the Siddur fell. Baal Shem Tov looks and says, were you following me the whole time? No, well, yeah, because I needed to talk to you. And how did you cross the river? Says, I saw you cross the river. Says, you saw me? And what did you see? Says, I saw you put down a handkerchief. And what did you do? Says, I did the same thing. Says, you put down a handkerchief and you crossed the river the way I did. Says, yeah. Says, you know what? Everything I told you about the prayer book, forget it. Whatever you were doing until now, just continue.
Ce face popa, nu ce spune popa. Da, iar de ce am mers pe Batistă pe râu, așa am mers și omul respectiv, nu? Popa, se spune așa, fă ce face popa, nu ce spune popa.
Right. This is not to say that the structure within religion is wrong. It just means that people have to find their way. And sometimes somebody has to find their way this way, and sometimes a little bit that way. And people are different, and there's sometimes different ways to come to the same point. But this was the message of early Hasidism. it's first of all a relationship to God. It's first of all connecting to God. If you need help, you have your advisor, your spiritual guide, who is the tzaddik, the Rebbe, what they call him. And you can talk to them. But this is the idea, to become close to God. And this simple idea became very, very popular in Poland at the time. Within 20 years after the death of the Baal Shem Tov, there were already hundreds of thousands of Jews who became associated with the Hasidic movement that quickly, because the message was like water to the thirsty. And so the idea of the main idea of the Hasidic movement, the idea of hope, the idea of simple faith. Simple faith can bring you close to God, because God wants the heart. Sincerity. A culture of sincerity of heart. There were other things the Hasidic movement did, but I think maybe I will stop today because I think it's a lot. So, but I will talk about 6 or 7 things that were important to the Hasidic movement. Creating their own synagogues, their own version of the Siddur, which we call the Siddur of the Isaac Luria, which was a Kabbalistic Siddur, to show people that they're special. The dress of the Hasidim, which actually was mostly used on the festivals and on the Sabbath, not so much during the week. The groups that form around the tzaddikim, around the special rebbes, the special tzaddik. The spread of the Hasidic movement. They even had their own way of slaughtering animals, which were slightly different than the other groups. The idea of bringing dancing into the synagogue, of course, men dancing. Music into the synagogue. There was music before, but a lot of music that goes together with dancing. The idea of doing things which will attract people, drinking a l'chaim with vodka, which seems like a very strange thing. Yes, especially when in last week's Pericopa, in the book of Leviticus, Aaron is told that his children are not allowed to walk into the temple with wine or with beer after they drink wine or beer. So the Bible is very, let's say, limiting about the consumption of alcohol. But I'm just saying the Hasidic movement as a popular movement, it's not that they're pushing it, but they're pushing this idea of getting the simple person involved. So the Hasidic movement will become a popular movement to make the simple person feel that they are special, that they can be connected, that God loves them. And we'll see how this develops also in Hasidic thought. This is not to say that Hasidic thought is popular. I'll have to differentiate that next week. But the movement is a popular movement. And popular movements know how to attract people. And of course, because popular movements know how to attract people, they also have the danger of becoming very liberal and very reformed, if you want to call it. Those who we'll see next week, that those who opposed the Hasidic movement were afraid that it was becoming a reform movement. Today, when we think of Hasidim, we think of ultra-Orthodox, hardcore, but that's not the way it started at all. I've always said if the Baal Shem Tov would go to Israel, to the city of Bnei Brak, which is one of the centers of ultra-Orthodox Judaism, they would probably chase him away. Because things have sort of changed in the last 200 years. But we'll talk about that. So this is introduction, a little bit about the Baal Shem Tov as an individual, reasons behind the Hasidic movement, which made it necessary at that time. And so tomorrow, right, which is instead of next week, tomorrow we will talk about at 4 o'clock again, some of the main 4. No, tomorrow is 4. Tuesday, Wednesday is fine.
You said Tuesday.
I'm sorry. So then if we start the week, it's Sunday. Yes,
Okay.
tomorrow is at 4. Tomorrow, Tuesday, 4 o'clock. Wednesday, 5 o'clock.
Wednesday.
Yes. So tomorrow we will talk about again.
Mâine la
No, 4. Yeah, patru, yeah. Demain. How do you say again name? Mâine, patru, yes. So we'll talk about some of the aspects of the Hasidic movement as a movement, why there was opposition, and a little bit about how some of these stories and thought of the Hasidim connect to this idea of the popular movement. Okay, merci beaucoup.